Good evening. I can hear you.
Okay, okay. Um, Welcome again to today's class. And as usual, I'm starting the recording for today's class. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can subscribe. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So, I think there is a little bit of mistake because from our curriculum, we seem to be in week 7, but um, we are actually in week 6. So we might have skipped or gone a little bit faster than normal with our classes. But that's still all right. So week 7 is supposed to be next week, which will be hands-on project, which means we'll be taking on a project from start to the end. It won't be so complex. It will be something very simple, just to test the different theories of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS that we've been talking about now for about a month now. Yeah, so basically it will be as similar as the websites we've used before. So it's nothing too complex there. It's because we can't just keep learning these theories day in, day out and not try to use them to build a theories or some concepts that are reoccurring. That way you get used to the technology and how to use it. And then you build your mind in a certain way that is best for you to make something work. So for last week, we continued JavaScript and we discussed a couple of things, which was the DOM. And we said the DOM means document object model. So the DOM is a way we can be able to access different elements in our HTML code. We can be able to get them such that we can also effect some changes on them. So I made a statement carry out CRUD operations on DOM on our DOM, which is we can create an element with the concept of DOM, and the elements are basically tags, the H1 tag, paragraph tags, font tags, div tags, and the rest of them. That is elements. So you can create an element, you can read, which is in other words, get an element, right? We talked extensively on that last week. You can get an element, you can update an element, which means you can change the contents of that particular element. All right. So probably it had other elements inside of it, maybe a H1 or a paragraph. You can update it with something else you want based on the functionality of your site at that point. And also you can delete, which means you can remove an element from your DOM. Okay, so that was the concept we spoke about last time. And then we looked at them one after the other, most especially getting elements. And we said there are a couple of ways, so many ways, okay, not so many, but there are few ways we can get elements. And the first one we talked about was getting elements based on the tag name method, right? Remember, a method is a function that is particular to something in JavaScript. And so this get elements by tag name is a function that is particular to the DOM. Okay, and we talked about how we use it. We say you first use the document keyword, and the document represents your entire page as a whole, right? So you do the documents, then dot get elements by tag name, and then whatever tag it is you have in mind to fetch, you put that particular tag here. So what this line of code will do is that it will go through your HTML code or your DOM and look for every element that has that tag name. And when it does that, it will put all of those elements into a HTML collection. And we said a HTML collection is an object, right? Is an object of array somewhat, because each of the elements are placed at a element at index 0. You have the second at index 1, the third at index 2. So that way you can easily pick one of those elements you want to actually make your change on. So HTML collection was also um, an idea that was introduced to us here. Okay, so we talked about that extensively. I think we did a couple of examples with this code, where this is our HTML code representing our DOM, right? So everything here this part, everything here is your DOM, right? And then we went into the JavaScript. Okay. So on doing this, what we did here is we went into our documents, and then we were trying to get every element that had a tag name of H1. So every H1 in our document, we wanted to get access to it. So that is what this particular line of code does. Okay. Then what we did here, what this remaining part does is that we assign the HTML collection of these elements into this variable. And so if I come down here and I say console.log all titles, and I save this, so let's go to my code, and I will open up our developers tool so we can see whatever we're trying to log in our console. So this is our developers tool, and then going to this console um, tab, the console tab, you see HTML collection and a parenthesis. Inside the parenthesis, you see 4 inside of it, which means there are 4 elements inside this HTML collection. Okay, so in opening it up, you now see the 4 elements inside of it, right? So you see a couple of other things, but these are not the elements. This first title, first title, second title, right? It's like expanding, is expanding these elements that are gotten there. So with these elements, if you actually want to make a change on the first element, then you can now use the index of 0 to get that particular element and effect a change on it, right? So this is how the DOM works. And so I would like to do, we'll do one exercise we've been doing before, where we prompt user for their age, and then we kind of do some technical operations to know who is older and the rest of them. You know, when we did it before, we were only logging our response here in our console. But this time, we'll make sure it shows on our DOM. Because if we learn JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and at the end of the day, we don't learn how to effect those changes on our screen, then it means the JavaScript is basically useless. Okay, so that was what we talked about elements. We said by tag name. Then the next one was getting elements by the class name. All right, and the class name is an attribute you give to a particular HTML tag, right? So like this one has a class of title. This H1 also has a class of title, as well as this. So the only difference between class attributes and ID attributes is that more than one element cannot share the same ID. So make sure that an ID is always unique to a particular element. You don't share two or more elements. They don't share the same ID. Whereas a class, an element you can give more than one element, the same class. They can share the same class. That way, it helps your styling, your CSS. So you don't have to style one element, then repeat the same style again for another element. Right? So if more than one element shares the same style, you cannot style a particular class and then give all of those elements that class. So that way the share styling that comes along with the class. But ID should always be unique. That is one difference between a class and an ID. And so the second method of getting elements was the class name, which is which we saw an example here. Where it says you also use the document dot because it's a DOM, then get elements by class name. And then inside here you put in the class name that you're trying to fetch, the class name of the element you're trying to fetch. So just like the tag name does, it puts all of those elements that share the same class into an HTML collection, HTML collection object, right? And then you can go over the same method in trying to get a particular element of your choice. Next up, we talked about getting elements by ID. So we said because ID is unique and specific to an element, it doesn't store the element in a HTML collection. It does this time it just fetches that particular element that has that ID that you're trying to get, and then you can make your manipulations, your changes on it. It doesn't work as the HTML collection because it's just one element you're trying to get. Aside that, it's the same method, document, then dot get elements by ID. Okay, and then we talked about a strange method that can carry out what get elements by tag name does, what get element by class name does, and get element by ID does. And that method is query selector. So with query selector, you can be able to get a particular element based on its tag name, based on its ID, and based on its class, right? How do we do that? All you have to do is say document dot query selector and then your parentheses. So inside here, if the element you're trying to get is, if you want to get it based on its tag name, inside of your parentheses, right, in a quotes. So this line, you're getting an element based on its ID, and then here you are assigning it into this variable called test title. But if you want to get an element based on its ID using query selector, so now you don't just write the ID name, but it should be accompanied with this hash, which is a selector for ID. We use it in CSS when we want to select an element based on ID. Okay, so this hash lets JavaScript or query selector understand that whatever you're putting inside there is an ID name, not a tag name. And so this way you get the element based on its ID. And for this, it gets the element by class. So what is to class as hash is to ID. Okay. And while get element by class name gets you all the elements that has that particular class name. If you use this method to get an element based on its class, it will only fetch the first element that meets that criteria. So if there are more than one element that has the same class name, it all of them and store them inside the HTML collection. Rather, what it will do is that it will fetch the first one it sees on your DOM and then ignore the rest. That's what query selector does. But if you want to get all of the elements that fits that criteria, you use another method called query selector all. So query selector all selects all the elements that meets that criteria. Either a tag name that probably you have more than one element that has the same tag name. You can use query selector to fetch all of them. But this time, it doesn't give you a HTML collection, but it gives you a node. So basically, there isn't so much difference between what query selector all gives you and what class name would give you, right? So it's like an object, the two of them. But the difference is that there are some methods that cannot be applied to the two of them. That's just it. But for now, um, just 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 understand that it stores all the elements inside an object. Okay. And then we talked about adding attributes like class name and ID. And, and then we talked about class list and thereabouts. And then we went over to manipulating them, which is we talked about creating an element using the create element. So probably you can create a paragraph tag on your own. Most times, you might not really use this method to creating an element, right? It depends on how advanced or how much practice you've done. You just find out different methods to use to achieve a particular thing. So yeah, you can create an element, either a paragraph or a div, and the rest of them, and then you can append into those elements you've created. We saw all of this in last class, and we're supposed to talk about one other concept, but I had to end the class early on. Okay, so for now, before we continue, let's try out some other. Let's try out another exercise to see what we can do. So going back um, to those exercises you tried out where we say prompts. Let me write it out as a comment. So firstly, I'm going to take all of this out. So we start again. We start again from afresh. But I want to write the question now. And the question is, I want us to prompt the user, right, of their name, right? And when we do, okay, I wanted to do this as a pseudo code, but let's start again. So the question is, get the name of a user and print on your screen a welcome message to them. Okay, so this is the question, or rather, this is the problem we hope to solve. So we want to solve the problem of getting an input from our users. So when our users decide to visit our site, we want to ask them to give us their name. And when they give us their name, we can now print out a welcome message to them. Probably if the person's name is John, we can say, "Hello John, you're welcome," something like that. Right? So now in normal programming, before you start programming, there are things you do to aid your programming, and that is first writing pseudocode. So pseudocode is like writing the steps you need to achieve that solution, like writing them one after the other. All right, then you can now go on to write the code. So pseudocodes are not programming codes. They're not programming languages, but rather they're just texts that helps you gives you an idea of how to solve it. So for us to solve this, we have to go through the steps one after the other. So feel free to call my attention if you get lost along the way. Because I'm introducing a new concept called pseudocode. It is not mandatory, but it would help you better analyze a problem and get a view of how to solve it. So for this particular problem, for us to be able to solve it, first we need to be able to prompt our user for a name, right? Because if we don't prompt them, then there's no way we'll get access to that name. So we need to be able to prompt the user for a name, right? So this is the first code, or this is the first step. So over here, let me say step one. Step one would be to prompt the user for their name, right? So we've gotten the user's name, right? What do we have to do again? So the second thing would be that this time we do not want to print it on our console. We want it to be on our screen, right? We want it to be on this screen, not our console. We are leaving console now. Console is mostly for debugging issues. So we want it to be shown on our screen. So it means what we have to do is if there is no element that we have to put that text in, we have to create the elements, right? So let's say this is our screen and we have this. Let's make this a paragraph rather. So we have this paragraph to put our text in. So we don't have to create an element. But what we rather need is we need to be able to get this element in our JavaScript so we can now edit it. Right? So that would be the next step. So I'll come down here and say step two would be to get the paragraph elements. Right? This is step two. Then step three would be to put the welcome text into the paragraph element. Okay, so with these three steps, we'll be able to write a short pseudocode that gives us an idea of how to solve this steps to solve problem. Okay, so this is how we solve problems in programming. You first write out a pseudocode that gives you an idea of how to solve them. And the first one is prompt the user, right? So now we will now have to go one after the other in trying to solve this problem. So let's start with step one. Step one says prompt the user for a name. So remember in our very first class in JavaScript how we prompt users, we use the keyword prompts, right? So prompts, and then we can put here, we say enter your name, right? So with this line of code, we can prompt our user to put in their name for us so we can have access to it. But we do not just want to prompt the user for a name. We also want to be able to store it inside a variable so we can now use that name whenever we want to, right? So when we prompt, we can now say const user name should be equal to this. So this line of code prompts the user for their name, and then we now assign it into this variable called username. So this is the very first step of our pseudocode. All right. So moving on to the next step, it says get the paragraph elements. So we want to get that element using what we discussed about last. So we say document dot. So from our from our code now, uh, this element doesn't have any class name. So it depends on you now. If you want to get this element based on a class, you can now give it any class you want. If you want to get it based on an ID, you can now give it any ID you want, right? But I don't want to stress this by giving it another class because we do not have any other paragraph here on our job. Okay? So I will just go ahead by using get element by tag name. So I'll say get elements by tag name. And inside here, I will put in P because it's the paragraph tag we're trying to get. So when we get this, we will not just get it, but we'll also store it inside a variable. So I'm going to create a variable here with const. I'll say paragraph element equal to. So now I've been able to get this, right? And I'm storing it here. But if you remember, we said when you use get elements by tag name, it stores all of those elements inside a HTML collection. So which means paragraph element is not just one element right now, even though um, we only have one paragraph here. So how can we be sure about that? Let's console.log paragraph elements, right? So we've gotten it and I want to console.log it right now. So we can see what we are storing inside here. So I'll quickly go to my page and once it loads up, let me cancel this. Okay, once it loads up, you see a HTML collection and then you see P inside here. So which means what is stored there is a HTML collection. All right, so we need to be able to actually go to ID of 0 to get that particular paragraph element that we hope to get, right? So it means this line of code needs to be adjusted. How does it need to be adjusted? We need to put in the index of 0. So what this will do is that it will fetch all the elements that are tag name of P, all right, into a HTML collection. And then this is just stating that I only want the element that's index 0, which means the first item. So once it fetches that first item, it will now assign that item into this variable. So now when we now console or log it again, let's see what we get. Okay, so you now see that you have a paragraph tag printed out. Okay, so this is a mistake you will run into most times when you're coding, and it may be frustrating if you don't figure out that this is giving you a HTML collection, and so you need to get a particular element you want using its index. Right? I think there was a time I was when I first started teaching, I was teaching this particular concept. I was trying to solve something using this concept, right? And I used this method to get elements. Okay, and then I carried out a couple of manipulations on the elements. And I was my code was correct to me, right? All the manipulations was correct, but I wasn't getting the required effects or changes, right? Because I forgot to understand that this here is returning a HTML collection. So it was until I had to console.log this variable, and I saw that this is the HTML collection, and I needed to actually indicate which elements in particular that I need to make those changes on. Okay, so it's a mistake you will always run into, and when you do, we now have ChatGPT and so many AIs that can help you to debug issues. Or you go to Google Chrome and ask a few questions. Go to Stack Overflow. In general, there is a large community of developers that are ready to listen to your problems when coding and give you a solution. In depends on how busy the community is. In few minutes, in few hours, you get a solution to it, and that is why the group is also open for you guys. So as you're practicing some exercises and running into problems or issues or bugs, you can easily post those problems on the group, and then we go about it and see how we can fix those problems. Okay, moving on. Um, so now that I'm sure that I'm getting that paragraph here, okay. So what I want to do now is I want to put the welcome text inside that paragraph element, right? So how do you put this text? So now we are not trying to append an element inside the paragraph, rather we are trying to put in a text, right? So we can say we want paragraph elements, then dots, text contents, right? So we can use either inner text or text content. And I think we talked about this from um, yeah, from here. We spoke about this here. Text contents. Let's see this inner text. You know. So we spoke about this text contents here. So we can come here and say text contents should be equal to. So what do we want out our message? So we want to say welcome. So probably John is the person's name. Welcome, John. Or let's say, hello, John. You are welcome to our application, right? So this is what we get for now. So let's first try out this and see what we get. So we'll go to our page and it says enter your name. So let's say I enter Google and I say okay. So we see here on our screen printed out, it says, hello, John, you are welcome to our application. So it means our code is working, but not to what we want it to. So right now, this text is static because regardless of whatever name the user inputs on our page, we will always get this message every time it comes to us. Hello, John. But what we want is that this name should be dynamic, such that it should change based on what the user puts on on the prompt. Okay, but we can't exactly make it dynamic because by using quotes, and we said in order for us to put variables there, we need to go back to template nature, which is this one here, which is like I said, it is the button under your escape. So on your top right, you see your escape button, and under your escape button, you will see the button that does this for you. Right? It is a template literal quote. So it is there. We can now put in a variable. So in place of John, we can now put in a variable. And for us to put in a variable, we use the dollar sign and curly brackets. So now remember that the name is stored inside user's name variable. So all you can do now is put in user's name inside your variable and you save it.
Oh, can you hear me? Hello? I'm not hearing again.
Hello guys, can you hear me?
No, I can't.
Oh, okay. My apologies for the short break. I think I lost my network. I'm trying to join in now again with my laptop so we can continue. Confirm it can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Okay, yes, now.
Oh, okay, okay. I don't know why this network is going on. Oh, so just to go over again code we've written so far. Um, first we use that for their name, right? Give them a little pop box, them to put in their name, and when they do that, we immediately store that value into a variable called user name. Any variable, um, you can give it any variable name you wish to use. That's fine. So we store it inside this variable, right? Then the next thing, or our next step is to get paragraph elements. We do that of code first. This of all would get every element, every paragraph element, right? Because it has. Okay, but because get elements by tag name or returns a HTML collection for us, we need to in the index of the particular elements we want to get access to. All right, and that is why we have this square bracket holding 0 instead of it, which means we want the elements at index of 0, which is the first element. That is what we want. So once we do that, we store that value inside this variable, variable called paragraph elements. So once we're done with the second step, we'll go over to the next step, the welcome text into the paragraph elements. And we say we want our context to be hello John, you are welcome to our application. Okay, with this name being dynamic based on what the user inputs in our prompts. and that is what this kind of code does. And when it does, we fix that into the text contents. So we are about to try what this application will do here. So if I put in Google again and I say okay, so we now see hello Google, you are welcome to our application. Okay, so if we refresh again, that means we get another prompt, Mark John, and say okay. So you see this saying hello Mark John, you are welcome to our application. Okay, so this is how um we can use all of the concepts we spoke about last week to put in content in a screen, no longer the console. Okay, because when somebody is using your application, your website, your web app, they would not have to go to inspect, come to console in order to see a message you're trying to pass to them, a message you're trying to do, or to see interactiveness of your site. They need to be able to see it on the screen visibly. So, and that's why we had to bring the idea and concept of not printing it on our console, but printing it here in the screen. So, with this idea of DOM, those all right. So we'll talk again about um how to do other things here, but probably uh as we progress, it's more complicated and more for us to see other concepts and play. So, but before I continue, is question on this so far? Is there anything that's still not clear for us before I continue? Oh, okay, I will take the silence as no, but please confirm if you can. Okay, no questions. Okay, all right. So let's talk about a concept that is very important with Dom because um, at some point or at some level, for something to be interactive, you have to actually interact with it, right? So, and by making something active, there are different ways action can happen, all right? And that's what we are going to be talking about now. And what we're talking about now is termed event listeners. Okay? So, events basically in JavaScript or in websites or web application or web development is when you try to interact with a website. Everything you try to do with a website is an event. So if you try to click on a button, that's an event. If you try to scroll on your page, that also is an event, right? If you try to hover on an item, it's an event as well. So that is what we're going to be talking about now. And in JavaScript, over here it says common HTML events are on click, which is when you click on something, on change. This is basically particular to input your form field, right? So when you change a value in field, it's termed a change event on that input field, which is moving your mouse on top of an item that is on mouse over. Then on mouse out is when you take your mouse away from that element. So right now, my mouse or my pointer is on this 22. This is on mouse over. But once I take it out, it's now on mouse out. That's what it is. Then you have on key down, which means when you press particular key, right? When you press it down, it's on key down. Then on key up means when you release your hand, right? Then on load is when your screen loads. So for the first time when it loads or anytime it refreshes, that is this particular event. So these are popular events you'll be using um, in order to make some interactiveness on your website. Method to an to a DOM object. We use so the reason why we're using event listeners is because you want to be able to listen, all right, or you want to be able to observe so that you can events that has happened. And when that event happens, you want to carry out a certain operation. That is the whole idea of event listeners. So they are just listening for a particular event that you specify. And once that event happens, then a it now carry a set of operations as you have asked it. So it says we use the add events method to listen for different event types on HTML elements. The add event listener method takes two arguments. First, it takes an event listener and it takes a callback function. So callback function is a little bit um, vague for us now because we've not spoken about that. Right, but basically, a callback function is when you have a function inside another function. All right, so it's just like putting one tag you put inside another flag is called a callback flag. Right, that's the idea. So a callback function is a function that you put inside function. Okay, so let's see how we use the add event listener. First, you call whatever element it is you want to place an event listener on. So which means if you have a button on your screen, okay, we'll see the example as we go on, but let's just explain this first. So whatever element it is you want to add, you want to put that event listener on, you write that element first, then you use the dots, and then you say add event listener. So when you do this, this is a method, which means it's a function. So it takes two parameters, two arguments rather. Remember when we talk about functions, we said when you're calling a function, all right, if you put in any to as an argument, why is my network? My network is okay. Oh, no. Oh, can anyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. My network just seems to be going on and off. That's right. Okay. So so it takes two arguments, and from last week we said arguments are when you call a function, and then you put in um, some items inside the parentheses, right? Those items or elements putting in are regarded as arguments. So the first argument here is regarded as the event trying to listen for. So if it is a click event, if it is a mouse over event, if it is a change event, whatever it is, you put that event here. So the event listener will listen to that particular event on whatever element it is selected. And the next argument, which is this, is now the function that carries out a particular operation you want to carry. It's a little bit, could I say, so much information back together, I guess, or just understand that it takes two things. the events and then the function. Okay, so let's see a typical example, right? A typical example would be this. So this is their DOM right now, and inside their DOM we have a button that says click me. That is it. So this is an internal JavaScript, right? They are writing script inside the additional code. So what they did firstly is that they use query selector to get this particular element by tag name, which is a button, right? So they got this button and then they set Um, Sorry again, guys. My network seems to be super active for today, and hopefully it's fixed for now. Uh, okay, okay. So, um, okay. Um, okay, so after fetching that element and putting it inside this variable of button, so the next thing is to add an event listener, right? So what they want is they want to listen for a click event on this button. So which means they want to listen to make sure that every time we click on this, they capture that particular moment and do something. So that comes about the add events method, add event listener method. And then the first argument is a click, which means we are listening for a click event on this button here that was selected. That is this. So over here is where they now write a particular function they want to be carried out. So this is a full function that firstly console.logs this out, it logs this out and logs this out. So let's try it out on our own so we can see what each of these console.logs does. So let's take this those things come up again. Let's have this button and it says click me. So this is our HTML. We have click me. Let me remove this script file. All right, so it's removed. So if you go back to our page now, I'll let it load up. Once it loads, we're not able to get this anymore. Okay, so this is what we get now. We get a screen that shows us first title, second title, third title, and then a button that says click me. So right now, every time we click on this button, nothing happens, right? It is a button which means it allows for clicking to be done on it, right? But there is no particular function that we are carrying out anytime we click on this for now. And so it doesn't do anything. So there comes about the event listener for this. So now let's go to our JavaScript and first let's get this button. So we come to JavaScript. I remember we didn't put a class on ID, so there's no need putting a class on an ID because there is no other button here. So we can easily do that get it using query selector. So you can see document dot query selector, and then in here we put button, right? So when we do this, we want to save this inside a variable. So I'll say on button elements should be equal to this. So make sure you confirm that you've been able to get your a particular element, the element you want with this kind of code. And how do you confirm? You console.log. So console.log button elements, right? So let's see if I actually got this. So over here, you can see this button that says click me. So which means indeed we were able to get the correct element. That is good. So now we want to add a click event listener on it. So let me take out this console log. And down here, I would say because it is this particular element, the button element we want to add it on. Remember, we are storing it inside this variable. So I will now say the element I want, which is button element, and I say dot add event listener. All right. So I want to add an event listener. So now I will start with the first argument, which is the event. And as you can see here, all of these are different events that we use in. that we use in HTML, right? There are so many, but this is not the one I want for now. What we want is the click event. So we choose click. You can write it manually by using the keyboard. That's fine. So secondly, we want to carry out a function, so which is the second argument. So while the first one is um a the first one is the event we want to listen for. The second one has to be a function we want to carry out. So with this, we are carrying out this particular function. Right now, this function is empty, all right, and has no name. Okay, so for now, I can just say console dot log click. Okay, so what this means is whenever I click on this button, I want this function to run. Okay, and what this function does is that it um it it loads click to the console. That is what this function does. So if I save this and I go back, so let me refresh again. So we start from fresh. So right now I have my screen just like this. Remember before now when we clicked on the button, nothing happened, right? But now when I click on this button, you see clicks showing on our console here. If I click again, you see it increasing to 2, which means it is occurring the second time. Right. So now we've been able to add an event listener on our button, and whenever we get that particular event, we can run a particular function. So this is a very simple function that logs out click. Right. So in real life, it could be that you want to take out a particular thing away from the screen and bring in something else to the screen. It could be completely different something and very complex something. So just like our, let me open up this project we are working on. Let me open up this design. One minute. Okay. So as you can see, this menu here is a button such that when you click on it, it brings up a navigation, like it slides the navigation in for you, or either the right or it pops it out. And this is the navigation, right? So if you click on this button also, it takes it out. Right, so this is how event listeners are done, and this is the rather complex function that is being carried out here, unlike this function right now that is just logging this out for us. But let's see what this example they did here, what it actually means. Okay, because sometimes we might run into situations where we need this. So what they are doing here is a random E here, and then they are printing out that E. So there is a little difference between theirs and ours because they have this thing that we refer to as arrow functions. It's a different way of creating functions, right? So we shouldn't worry about that. So if we want this E, what we'll do is over here, we'll put this E here, right? So E is like a particular event. It could be any, you could say E, you could say D, right? So when we do this and we put it here, okay, so we want to print out this E so we can see what it does. So we are printing out clicks as a string, and we are also printing out this E as a variable. Okay, so when we go back here now and we refresh this, and I press click. So we click print it out here as a string first, and then we have something else here printed out here. So it says important event. So it's trying to give you this particular event that just occurred, right? See that an event has occurred here, and there are so many events here that uh, that you can use to do anything you want. As you can see here, the type is click, right? So this is what that E is about. So this line of code is just printing out this as a string and then printing out the particular events that occurred. Okay. So when we go back, so inside all of these things, there is something regarded as a target, right? So if you come to target, it's showing you a button. So which means this button. So it means if you do e.target, you get the particular button that you clicked on that carried out this particular function. This is a little bit advanced, right? I'm just trying to introduce you to this concept. You have to understand this now or get it now, but you should have an idea that something like this exists. So if events will get very complicated to based on what you hope to achieve. But for now, we can now write an event listener and carry out a simple function that clicks that shows something to our console. That is good. So to make it more complex and more practical, what if we want to click on this and then change probably the content of this, or we want to change the color of our H1? Okay, so let's see how we can do that. So if we want to change the color of H1, remember that you have to first get your elements, because you can't just change property of an element that you've not gotten. So it means first, let's get our element. So let's say const, let's say heading elements. Okay, let me say first heading, right? Should be equal to documents dot get element by tagging, and I want to use the H1. For now, I want the first element, so I use the index of 0, right? So good. So now I don't want to console.log clicks anymore. Probably I want to show clicks and I want to do something else. So I'll come down. So after console.logging click, what I want to do is I want to change the property of that, which is the style, right? So I will go to first heading, which is the element in particular. Then I say dot style. Okay, so this is the way we change CSS styles in JavaScript. So dot style. But now, which style do we want to change? We want to change the color. So we say dot color, right? So now we want to make the color to be red. Let's say red. This is what we want, right? So let's refresh our page. And then when I click on this, you now see that this first element changes from black to red. And it also prints out click here on our screen. So if you click on it again, it doesn't change the color because all it does is make it red. It doesn't add and remove. So this is a rather is a simple way of making something interactive or changing the color of the text. Right? You can also change the content of the text. So let's say this second one, you want to change its content, right? While changing the first one to red. It means you have to fetch the second one as well. So let's change this to second heading, and this will now be h1 of 2. So now I want to change second heading dot the text content, right? So I want to say the text content should be edit text, right? So remember, it does this line after another line. So to do this one first, it will first log click to our console, then it will change the first heading to red, and then it will change the content of the second heading to edited text. It will do this once, like, in space of seconds, but the computer knows to carry out the operations one after the other. So let's go again and refresh. So everything is back to normal. So once I click on this button, you now see the first one and click this change here. You see the title, the first title is changed to this. Okay, we selected the wrong heading, and that's why this one was now edited to edited text instead of this one. Okay, but you get the idea, right? So this is how we can make things, manipulate things in JavaScript, right? But this is one way of doing something, especially for this text, right? So there are other ways you can do things, which is going to be a little bit complicated. But before I go on, is there any question on this we've discussed so far before I move on? Is there anything that doesn't seem quite clear? I need me to go over it again. Okay, so I'll take these settings as a no. So I'm going to introduce us to another way of manipulating DOM, where you don't have to manipulate the color directly from here. Okay, so another way would be to have a class that does that particular thing, right? So if I have a class of red that has color to be red, and I put it here in my HTML, it means what I'm trying to say is this. Let me take out everything on my page. So I'm taking out everything on my page, and now I want to add a class of red, and I say the color should be red, right? This is a class. So now, if I go onto my page, let me refresh it. Everything is black. Okay. So if let me see if this CSS is linked. Okay, it's linked. So if I now put in this class and I put red, this first title, it means automatically my content here would have a color of red. You can see now it has a color of red. And if I remove it, it will go back to the previous color, which is black. As you can see, it has the previous color, which is black. Okay. So it means instead of using that procedure where I click on this button and it turns red, and every time I click on it, it remains red, I can make it such that the first time I click on the button, it adds that class to the tag, thereby making it red. And if I click on it again, it removes the class, thereby making it black, right? So this could be to our effect. So let's see how we can do that. So it means I'll have to get this one first, and we already have that line of code here. Let me take out these other functionalities from our function. All right, let me take them out from our functions first. So what I want is for this first elements, first heading. What I want to access now is the class list, right? Which is the all the which is an array of this class. So I say um first heading dot class list. So now the method I want to use is called a toggle method. Toggle, right? So for this toggle, what toggle does is that for the first time it will add, for the second time it will remove, which means if the element has that particular class inside of it, it will remove it. But if it doesn't have that class, it will add it. So here is where I now put in the class that I want to be toggled every time I click on the button. And that class is red because red is the class name we're written here, right? And remember in our HTML, it is not here. So now let's go back to our browser and let's refresh. Let's go to elements so we see what is really occurring. This here is the first element we are trying to manipulate right now with JavaScript and CSS. And as you can see here for the class, it only has title. So now, once I click on this button, you can see here it adds the class of red to our class list, thereby making first title to have a color of red. Okay, so that is when I click on it first. So when I click on it again, it now removes the red class, thereby making this black again. So this here on is the toggle effect. So you can click and untick in order to um, remove these things. Right. So this is a different way of doing what we did before, and to my own view and perspective, I feel a more better way, right, of manipulating this. So this is an idea of how we can carry out this function. So to complete this in this our exercise like we did before, this our project we did from I think our third week or second week. We'll use JavaScript to make this. And we'll do this tomorrow. We'll dedicate tomorrow to learning this. The reason why I'm spacing JavaScript now is because it's a little bit technical and logical. And we need some time to like go over these things again ourselves to get the foundations and basics for ourselves properly. That is why I'm spacing JavaScript out for us. Okay, so this is how we can use JavaScript to manipulate your screen. So I want to ask, is there any question so far? Yes. Is there any questions? Okay, so this so far is what we have done with our project. We want to be able to add a functionality where we click on this button and then we have the sidebar appear on our screen. And when we click on it again, it takes it out of our screen. That would be the next focus in completing this project for our class. Okay, so would randomly as we concluded every basic concepts of JavaScript that we need to get, and so just to go over it again, we started off with introduction to JavaScript, and then the data types, where we talked about a couple of different data types in JavaScript. We talked about numbers, strings, booleans, undefined, null, and a few other. And we tag those as the primitive data types, which are like the original data types, right? And then we went over to discuss non-primitive data types, which are array and objects. And we say these are data types that allow us structure primitive data types based on what we want, right? And we'll see most of its use and functions when we start learning React very soon. And after that, we went on to conditionals, where we said there is an if statement that tests if a particular condition is met or not. And based on if a condition is met or not, you want to carry out some functionalities, you want to carry out some operations, right? That is what conditionals is about. We talked about arrays, and then we went on to loops, which is reoccurring, like rotation. You want to carry out a particular operation repeatedly as long as the condition remains true. But once that condition becomes false, you want to stop that. You want to stop that operation, right? And then we discussed functions and how to write functions. So we said functions are reusable line of code that carry out a specific task. All right. So there is a specific operation or task that you carry out whenever you click on this button, right? So whenever I click on another person, you also want to carry out that task. So you don't have to start writing the same code you want for that person again for this second button. So all you have to do is write that function, that particular task in a function, and then call the function every time you click on either of the buttons. That way, it helps you write a good code by not repeating yourself unnecessarily. And then we went on to talk about sum, and we spoke about how you can get elements either based on ID or based on the class name, based on the tag name and thereabouts. And then we talk about how to manipulate them, which is written elements, adding in an attribute, either a class or an ID. And also we talk about appending into an element, right? And then today we just finished talking about event listeners. So with these concepts, right, as simple and basic as these concepts, we can be able to combine them together on what you want to achieve. You can use these theories, these concepts to say what you want to achieve. And we'll see first time tomorrow how we can use that to finish up um, our projects that we started. And so with this is where we end today's class, hoping that you go over these concepts again. You have this documentation. You can go over them again just to get a feel or just to get used to what, right? You don't have to understand them fully right now, but you have to like get a feel of it. So when I'm talking about it, it's no longer new to you. So we'll end today's class here. And if there's no question, I will see you tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock, as we run on this project. So thank you guys and see you tomorrow.